Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Commissioner Tim Echols coming to you from the state capitol here in my office at the Georgia Public Service Commission, and really pleased to have two great Georgians on the call today. Dr. Cabrera, the president of Georgia Tech, and Dr. David Gattie, who's a professor in the engineering department out there at the University of Georgia, where I hail from. Great to have both of you. Dr. Gattie, thanks for being on with me today.
Thanks for inviting me, Commissioner. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, and President Cabrera, even though I have 3 degrees from the University of Georgia, I seem to deal more with Georgia Tech people in my job than I do with Bulldogs. There are just so many Georgia Tech grads involved with anything related to any type of energy. I know you're really proud of all of them out there, but Georgia Tech has just become just a preeminent institution in producing some of the best engineers in the United States. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for having me.
Hey, we're going to talk today about the future of engineering. And as I travel, and I've just returned from Switzerland, Germany, and France at 3 different events, the European Battery Conference in Stuttgart, the World Nuclear Exhibition in France, and then over in Switzerland at a R&D facility with a company now going public called Energy Vault, basically taking a very old concept of pump storage. And the Northern Europeans certainly have perfected pump storage, but now they're moving pump storage into things other than water and taking basically compressed earthen materials into 35-ton blocks and lifting it up and letting it down and essentially, creating kinetic energy and putting that back on the European grid. So there's a lot happening out there in the world, I think, with this energy transition that's going on. I want to get both of your thoughts on the transition and maybe the role Georgia might play, both in our 2 top universities, Georgia Tech and the University of Georgia. So, Dr. Cabrera, let me start with you on this topic of the future of engineering, and have you bring us up to speed on kind of what you're thinking, what Georgia Tech is thinking as you train thousands every year.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you again, Commissioner, for hosting this conversation. I don't think there is a topic that comes to the same level of importance and impact in the lives of all of us on this planet than finding solutions to energy. And just to put it in context, as you mentioned before, we are one of the largest technological universities in the nation, and really by extension in the world. We do research. We're a very research intense university. We're now at about $1.2 billion in research grants every year. We produce more engineers than virtually any other school of engineering, and we take that size and that impact quite seriously, and in terms of what is expected of us in defining the future of the engineering profession. I arrived back to Georgia Tech. I'm an alum, but I arrived back to Georgia Tech in the fall of 2019, and very soon after I arrived, we started a process of soul searching and introspection. We call it strategic planning, to try to decide what is the next set of dreams and aspirations for Georgia Tech. And what was very interesting as part of that process was the crafting of a new mission statement. The idea behind this new mission statement is not that new, but the statement itself is. And says, we develop leaders who advance technology and improve the human condition. And it reflects really the spirit of this institution. We believe in technology, but not because of technology itself, not for technology's own sake, but because of the role that technology can play in helping us find solutions to the big problems that we face. So if we are in the mission of improving the human condition, it begs very immediately the question is, what are the aspects of of the human condition that need to be improved. And instead of answering that question from scratch, we looked at how some of our major global institutions have answered that question. And very in particular, of course, the United Nations 4 years ago approved a new framework, a new global framework called the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, this is when all the nations on our planet have come together and agreed to a list of 17 goals. These are the things we absolutely need to solve. And these are not just problems in the developing world. These are problems that are very local, right here in Atlanta, right here in Georgia, and expand this nation and everybody else on the planet. Well, what's very interesting when you look through the list of those goals is one of those, goal number 7, seems particularly central to all of the above. And that is the ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And it is central because if you look at the other goals that have to do with absolutely essential aspects of human life, whether it's finding solutions for poverty, providing eliminating hunger, dealing with pollution, providing education, healthcare, providing economic growth opportunities for everybody else. No matter what of the other 17 goals you look at, they all say, well, how are you going to power those solutions, right? How are you going to power economic growth in a way that doesn't cause all the problems? How are you going to provide education, healthcare? How are you going to feed the world, a growing population now going on to 10 billion? So those questions of energy have become absolutely central to our life on this planet. And of course, central to places like Georgia Tech, where we, as our mission, have agreed that our role is to have an impact in that. And the U.S., by the way, is the perfect place to have those conversations because we are probably less than 5% of the world population. We use over 17% of the world's energy resources. So I think we have the opportunity and the responsibility really to address that. I just returned from Houston, of course, the one of the oil capitals of the universe, definitely probably arguably the energy capital of this country. And I spoke to the CEOs of some of the leading energy companies, and it was very clear that it's no longer an option, if you will, that it is at the core thinking of each one of our top energy companies, including the oil companies, which is how we're going to transition to a different type of energy. And that's where technology comes in. That's where engineers come in. At Georgia Tech, just to put it in perspective, we have over 1,000 people working on clean energy, 300 of them working on solar alone. I mean, so we and this is not in one particular discipline, but throughout the entire institute. And that work spans a whole number of areas, as you can imagine. Obviously, I think, Commissioner, you're very familiar with the microgrid that we just installed in Tech Square. In fact, it was approved by the commission. And it is, for those who are not familiar, it is part of the CODA development. You have seen what has happened in Midtown. I mean, this is a neighborhood. When I was a graduate student at Georgia Tech, this is a part of town that we never spent any time in. It was as my kids would call it, sketchy. It was not a very attractive part of town, and now it is the home of some of the leading companies in the world. Google just put up their logo on this big tower they're about to occupy. Cisco announced that it's coming to town. Of course, NCR is already there, and the list of companies that are calling this neighborhood home is growing by the day. Well, as part of the CODA development, CODA is a building that is very central in this neighborhood that Georgia Tech participated in and helped build. We created this microgrid to really experiment. I mean, part of what we're trying to do is we're not just teaching engineers, we're not just developing engineers who can hopefully come up with this with new solutions to these very complex problems, but not only we're producing some of those ideas in our labs, but we need to lead by example. So we want to make sure that Georgia Tech acts as a lab for some of these solutions, but also that when students are spending time on our campus, that they can be inspired about what is possible. This microgrid, of course, is one of those examples. It is exploring, it's helping us get a lot of data and understand better how a microgrid can increase flexibility, can increase reliability and resilience, can really help us even buffer failures of the broader grid. I mean, that's just one example. I'll tell you something else we did in the last 3 or 4 years. We developed with our Strategic Energy Institute in collaboration with the University of Georgia and Emory. People think University of Georgia and Georgia Tech just compete in the football field. We're not going to talk about football today, but actually we collaborate a lot. In this case, we produce this, a new sort of a model solar ordinance that has been now downloaded hundreds of times and has informed solar projects in counties, not just in Georgia, but beyond. And just to put it in perspective, in 2015, Georgia had about 350 plus megawatts of installed solar capacity. Last year, that had multiplied to over 2,500 megawatts of installed capacity. I think we're in the top 10 in the country. Hopefully, we'll keep moving up. What we're trying to do is empower our faculty and our students to not just produce new ideas, but turn them into viable businesses where they can take those technologies to market and put them into practice. Perhaps the biggest success we've had recently is a company created and spun off by a faculty member, a Georgia Tech professor, Gleb Yushin, and the company is called Sila Nanotechnologies. This year he just raised, in his last series of funding, he raised $590 million for an enterprise valuation of almost $3.5 billion. He has already contracts with BMW, with Daimler-Benz, and with other even small electronics companies. And what they've done is really, even though the sort of the lithium-ion batteries that have been powering many of our devices, that started in the early 90s. I think it was Sony who that started pushing that technology. That technology hasn't improved that much since then, and our colleague Professor Yushin has developed a new material that can improve energy density by initially by 20%. He thinks he can even make an improve about 50%. I mean, this is a company that is taking a solution from the lab, putting in cars and devices, and in the process creating economic opportunity and jobs. I'll just close because I want to hear the rest of the conversation, Commissioner, but maybe by mentioning also how we're using our own campus as a laboratory. I mentioned the microgrid. Probably the most exciting project in the last couple of years is we built a new facility called Candida, the Candida building. You can, and I invite you all to look it up. Candida is the first so-called living building in the Southeast, and it is the highest standard. You don't just build it and have it inspected to earn. You have to operate it for at least a year and prove that the building can produce more energy than it consumes. The features in this building, it's actually a beautiful building. But I mean, it has, during the first 12 months of operation, it collected and infiltrated 15 times the amount of water that is needed for operations. In fact, it's a source of water for other facilities on campus. It supplied 225% of its energy needs. It has a whole canopy of solar panels on the top. The energy efficiency, the materials that were used. It also includes other elements of social inclusion and responsibility of responsible labor. It's not just on the environmental side. But anyway, it was thought to be impossible to have a living building in the Southeast because of the humid and hot weather. And we approved that that is not impossible at all. This building is hosting not just specific departments, but it's hosting classes in every discipline. We want students from every discipline to spend time in this building. There are lots of panels explaining how the building operates. Even when you go to the bathroom, people feel weird because I always say, if you go to the building, you have to go to the bathroom. It has foam flush toilets and waterless urinals and process. I mean, it's just an unbelievable piece. But the reason why we did that is so that hundreds and hundreds of students and people who organize conferences and the like every year, they walk in, we want them to be intrigued. to read about the building, to ask questions, and to leave with a sense of possibility of what it is that we can do by applying the best of our science and our technology, and but oriented towards really dealing with some of the biggest questions that we're facing as a humankind. So anyway, those are some examples. Happy to continue the conversation later, but thank you, Commissioner Echols, for including me today.
Yeah, President, I think about the bridge that goes from your main campus over to Midtown. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking, and as you described what Midtown used to be, that it's amazing what a bridge can do, isn't it?
You're exactly right. This year we celebrated the 20th anniversary of when the first shovel went into the ground. And for those of you who are not familiar, or who were not familiar with Atlanta 20 years ago, all that neighborhood was empty lots and broken windows and chain fences. It was and not terribly exciting establishments, abandoned buildings, and now it's booming. I mean, now it is really the place where all the top companies want to be. And a big part of that was that civil engineering, construction, expansion of a bridge connecting our campus and the rest of Midtown that now makes it a seamless experience. And then, of course, investments by the Georgia Tech Foundation and the state and many others. But yeah, it's been an amazing, really transformation of a whole urban core.
President Cabrera, just to call out a couple of outstanding staff members that you have. I think about Dr. Marilyn Brown and the great work that she's doing with the Drawdown Project. I think about Deborah Lamb and the work that she is doing over there at Tech Square. As you think about the smart city stuff that she's doing, I guess maybe it was 3 years ago that I rented a bunch of the low-speed electric vehicles. And with Deborah, we did a smart city tour and orientation where Kia supplied all of the headphones that they use for their factory tour. And we gave everyone a headphone in about 7 of these vehicles. And then we went by the Candida building, which was being built at the time, went by the Net Zero building on campus, and then started really up at the Coke headquarters. We stopped there for a short tour. Everybody stayed in the vehicles, and each presenter just was given the microphone, and all of our participants who were sustainability leaders could hear because of their headphones. And we went all the way from the Coke World headquarters down North Avenue to Ponce City Market, and just thinking and dreaming about what that corridor is going to be in the future as a living lab on that side of your campus. I mean, I know you're excited about that.
We are very excited, and you're absolutely right. But think about the opportunity. This is not just, it is a need that we have. Again, as 10 billion fellow human beings on this planet, we absolutely have to crack the energy question, right? But there is huge opportunity in for a place like Georgia, with the abundance of talent and great universities, and to really be on the forefront of coming up with these new solutions. I think the opportunities are incredibly exciting.
I don't know if you heard NPR this morning. I was listening as I came into the office today. They were kind of doing a postmortem on the whole Texas grid fiasco from last year. And if any of you listen to NPR, you know that their pieces are much more extended than a normal news piece. And so this was being recorded at a gas plant, and they were talking about the lack of firm transportation that those gas plants had secured for natural gas. And it wasn't just that they weren't winterized. It was the fact that gas was not delivered, and they lost pressure in their system, and they went down. And over 4.5 million people were without power there. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they didn't have firm transportation on their natural gas. Number 7, you mentioned in your strategic plan, ensuring access to energy that's fair and reasonably priced, but it's got to be reliable. And I know from my seat here at the Public Service Commission, I mean, I'm all about clean energy. I have solar on my house. I drive an electric car. But if it's not reliable, if there's not a reliable grid, people lose their life. And you have companies that really don't want to come there because they don't know if they're going to have power or not when they need it. What are your thoughts on reliability?
No, it's absolutely essential. In fact, our experiment with the microgrid in Tech Square is precisely an exercise of reliability and thinking about the role of microgrids within bigger grids and how they can reduce errors and guarantee supply and reduce the risk. But I think the problem, just like you described it, what he points out is that the issues of energy need talent from every possible discipline and every possible angle. You need civil engineers, you need mechanical engineers. Of course, you need electrical engineers. I mean, you think about the number. You need computer science and artificial intelligence to find better solutions on how to transport energy. I mean, you think about, and then of course, all of that is absolutely essential to have the right regulatory and policy framework on top of it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So it's a fascinating from the standpoint of problem solving, which is, I guess, what engineers do. It's fascinating because it does require all those different disciplines to come together.
Dr. Gattie, let me get you to unmute yourself there. And as I returned from the nuclear conference in Paris just Sunday, this conference was coming off of the COP26 UN conference in Glasgow. And what I did not know, because I was not at the Glasgow conference, and I did discover this when I was in Paris, was the key role that the Russians had played in advancing nuclear energy as a clean resource in the future. And I know you've been talking about this for a long time, about the importance of nuclear energy and being able to meet some of the climate objectives that we have. You've also talked about the importance of national security as a reason for America to stay involved. And I have to tell you, Dr. Gattie, that there weren't many Americans at this conference. It was dominated by the French, by the Russians, and by the Koreans. Does that give you concern?
Thank you, Commissioner. And I hope you'll bear with me. I got just a little bit of a head cold. I may have to hit the mute from time to time to cough. So the short answer to your question is it does deeply concern me. It has for some time. I think that what that may reflect, because your point is well taken, it's correct. I think that Russia has been at the tip of the spear for some time now, for quite a few years, on developing not only the traditional large-scale nuclear power plants, but also they even have, I think, the world's only currently in operation fast reactor. They're looking at small modulars. They're also up in the Arctic with floating nuclear plants that they're going to use to power their activities up there, which are to mine minerals, metals, and to do further oil and natural gas exploration. But they all, the fact that Russia is actually out on the tip of the spear with a technology that not only is if you go back to the 50s with President Eisenhower and his administration, not only is nuclear power fundamentally, first principles wise, a national security technology and resource, but currently it's the only resource that is going to address the issues that you just brought up, and that is climate change, carbon emission reductions, and firm capacity. No other resource is going to be able to combine and actually address all of those issues. What we're working on here at the University of Georgia in that space is engineering is teaming up with the Center for International Trade and Security, which is situated in our School for Public and International Affairs. And we are actually developing and working in the energy policy space, to President Cabrera's very good point there, that without the regulatory and policy framework for technologies to actually be deployed, if you don't have the policy that supports it, technology has nowhere to land. And if the policy is anti-nuclear, you can develop the best nuclear technology in the world, but if the policy won't support it, it's got nowhere to go. So we're working at the university here between engineering and the Center for International Trade and Security to elevate the conversation around U.S. energy policy to be one that's, the only way I can describe it maybe succinctly is for it to be security centric, but climate inclusive. That is, first and foremost, the way we see and view energy is within a wider aperture. That is, we're very concerned about climate change. That's a settled point. We don't get into arguments and conversations about that. But in order for us to ensure that we have reliable supplies of energy, in order for us to ensure that we are very competitive economically with our great power competitor, in particular China, and to ensure that our national security is underpinned, we see nuclear power not only as a climate issue, but primarily, first and foremost, as a national security issue. If you look at nuclear construction and deployment since the year 2000, the only the only reactor that we've connected to the grid was Watts Bar 2, and it actually was started back in the 70s, and it was just a debacle over the course of time. But that's the only reactor that we have connected to the grid. The only reactors that have started construction, of course, as you know, Commissioner, are right here in Georgia over at Plant Vogtle. So this is, to us, this is a top level national security concern with regard to just our relative technological capacity to Russia and China in particular. So yeah, your point's well taken. Very disappointing that we didn't have much American representation you were in Paris, is that right, Commissioner?
Yes. So the World Nuclear Exhibition, was dominated by the French because they've basically taken our technology and got off of it. And in fact, if the wind's not blowing in Europe, I mean, the French are powering a lot of Western Europe. I mean, they have been able to really keep their program going despite Fukushima, despite the loss of a lot of German business. The Germans are really moving away from nuclear energy. They'll close a few additional reactors this year, and I think by the end of next year they'll have all of them closed. Let me ask President Cabrera. Let me ask you this question, because you talked about developing leaders who can advance technology. As you think about energy technology for the future, do you feel like that it's primarily going to be solar plus batteries? Will it include hydrogen? I mean, as you advance technology, is there anything left to be gained with natural gas technology or coal technology? What are your thoughts on that?
The future, we have to move towards net zero. So, we're going to have to use everything during the transition, but ultimately the goal has to be to lower our dependency on carbon sources. So that includes nuclear, of course. I mean, there's absolutely, I don't think there is any scenario down the line that doesn't include a heavy dose of nuclear, but all the renewables have to grow. And I think that, again, that is a huge market opportunity. I think some discussions around how to combat climate change and how to move to a new transition in energy, I think they sometimes are presented as a sort of a painful problem that it doesn't have to be. I mean, I think the U.S. has an opportunity to lead, and others are not waiting. I mean, your own experiences going to these international conferences, I think they show it. So, but it's going to be all of the above. Probably, we have to continue to rely on carbon during the transition, but very quickly we have to move away from it.
Dr. Gattie, let me ask you about COP26. I mean, this was, the follow-up conference to the Paris Accord. I mean, the Kyoto Protocol that Europe has been essentially complying with, was a previous iteration of that. As you look at what came out of COP26, I mean, it's easy for politicians to set goals. It's another thing altogether to be able to measure results, right? And it's hard to close a nuclear plant, replace it with a gas plant, and be making advances in CO2 reduction.
Yeah, in fact, that doesn't happen. You don't close a nuclear plant and replace it with a gas plant and reduce CO2 emissions. I think one of the, and I followed the Glasgow conference as well as I could while I was trying to teach my courses, and I would try to go back and pick up. But I think a couple of the takeaway points, Commissioner, there, it's almost like the proverbial, the dog caught the car, and now what in the heck are we going to do with it? I think they learned. I think that particularly the industrialized nations learned that those fossil fuels that industrialized every advanced economy today, every other country is looking to do the same thing. Even with China and India towards the end of that, where the verbiage was coal phase out, they weren't going to go with it. In fact, they had the verbiage changed to coal phase down, because what they realized, not only China and India, but the other developing economies, as well as the U.S., is that, to President Cabrera's point, fossil fuels are going to be a part of in between where we are today and some lower or zero carbon future. The question is going to be just to what extent and what role perhaps is the U.S. going to have in that transition. And I think that realization that coal is probably not going to be going away globally anytime soon raised the point with U.S. diplomats that just how can the U.S. provide leadership? And I think part of that leadership needs to be a couple of things. That is, not to necessarily focus only on decarbonizing or reducing the carbon in our economy, but also engage in where 50% of the world lives, which is in the Asia Pacific, engage with them in renewables, batteries, lower carbon natural gas. I think we've got over 2 million megawatts of coal plants out there. Carbon capture and storage is no longer just an option, it's a necessity. And also deploying small modular reactors. I would like to see the U.S. take a leadership role in almost a reverse Marshall Plan, where we go, not reverse Marshall Plan, but a Marshall Plan type thing, where we are engaging those emerging economies in what they need. And it's been said here several times, reliable, affordable, firm energy resources for power generation. They cannot do what they need to do without firm, reliable power generation. So I think the two takeaways were fossil fuels are going to be here for a while, and we need nuclear power.
President Cabrera, I was with some fellow commissioners. We have a national association of regulatory commissioners. I was with them in Louisville about 6 weeks ago. And one of the lines of conversation was, as we looked at how Houston, where you just came from, how Houston and the oil business has been for some time kind of a perfect fuel in the sense that impacts farming and fertilizer and plastics and and home heating and transportation. So oil has been a popular fuel for a reason. But how hydrogen and the production of hydrogen, possibly with nuclear reactors, may be that next perfect fuel that we have, and how the Southeast would like to be the supply chain for that, right? Because we have a number of nuclear reactors across the region. And I think there's a lot of interest from commissioners. And the reason the commissioners are important is that it's one thing to theoretically say something works. It's another thing to have a regulator compel a utility to actually do it and to spend the money on it. So these commissioners in Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana and Tennessee and North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, they're important officials, sometimes appointed, sometimes elected, in being able to move a utility in a state down a certain path. And so, Georgia has moved down the path of building a nuclear reactor. It's been a hard path, an expensive path, a long path, and probably not a lot of commissioners that I deal with are raising their hand and say, hey, I would like to do what you've done. No, they're not interested in doing it at all. And that's why I think this new messaging around nuclear, particularly with hydrogen, and the fact that hydrogen can be that next perfect fuel. And I know Georgia Tech, you guys are looking at this, and you're talking about not only hydrogen, but you're looking at all types of energy, because you are trying to advance technology.
Yeah.
And
no, you're right, Commissioner. And I'll tell you, I think the key, and I'm glad you have your job, because it's not an easy one. But if I think about the goals, first of all, we have to lower the price of renewables, and that's an urgent. I mean, the reason why we're, if you will, addicted to coal is because it's cheap and it's abundant, right? So, and it is hard for industrialized nations to tell, just like Professor Gattie was saying, it's hard for us to tell India and Southeast Asia and China, it's like, thou shalt not burn coal because it's bad for all of us, when in fact our standard of living has been built on burning coal for the last 200 years. So the best thing we can do is figure out as fast as we can how to make renewables competitive price wise, and that is a race that we have to absolutely win. The second one is, because it's very, very hard to pick winners at this point, is to facilitate a number of solutions. And I think that's one where I know it's easier said than done, but from the standpoint of commissioners like you and others, I mean, the more we can do to make sure, instead of making single bets, to sort of like open up, because we don't know where the solutions are going to be. And the third is to continue to encourage the big energy companies to be part of the solution. That's why I came back from Houston, if you will, more optimistic than I was. For years, I think some of the oil companies have been probably, or they appear to be, more intent on kind of maybe defending themselves against climate change acquisitions rather than proposing new solutions. Now, when you talk to them, they're making different bets. I mean, you talk to the folks at BP, and they're probably more moving towards solar and wind, and the folks at Exxon are really thinking and making major investments in carbon capture. And honestly, what is to be celebrated is that these companies now have accepted the role as leaders in that energy transition. Some of them, like Exxon, of course, undergoing this very interesting activist investor campaign during the summer, which I think has not gone unnoticed to anybody else. So have those big energy companies now accept the role as leaders in this energy transformation, and then again, from the standpoint of the regulator, just trying to make sure we have as many shots on goal as possible. I think those would be my comments.
Dr. Gattie, at the conference in Paris, they were talking about 2030 and 2050. Those are the two dates that kept coming up from different countries around the world, that they wanted to have this intermediate goal by 2030 and then be net zero or carbon free by 2050. What do you think is a reasonable timeline for something like that? I mean, can it be done? Is it going to vary country to country? What are your thoughts?
So it's absolutely going to vary country to country. I think that's just a given. So maybe a little more intricate response than you're looking for here. This is, I don't, for one thing, I don't like setting dates. I don't like setting dates as to when we're going to be at a certain carbon level, particularly if that level is zero. Again, our perspective here at Georgia is we're not only talking about decarbonizing, we're really talking about rewiring our economy, rejiggering, if you would, our industrial base. What is going to be the technology in our industrial base? What are going to be the resources in our industrial base? So what I would propose, and with, again, not to give a date because I don't have one, I'm not confident. So I'll just tell you that I'm not confident that either the U.S. or even a substantial industrial economy can decarbonize by a year as early as 2030. But what I would like to see us do is treat this issue like we do emergency room issues. When you have patients come in, you triage. The U.S. and other developed economies, their carbon emissions are going down. That needs to continue. We need to continue to innovate. But in those regions, as we talked about before, in the Asia Pacific, where emissions are just flat out, they're increasing, that's where our attention should focus. So my suggestion here is that we work on hardening up our domestic infrastructure, because no matter what we do in the U.S., climate change isn't going to stop at our borders just because we have a great climate policy. We have to deploy overseas and work on getting those emissions down. I think then to that point of your question, Commissioner, if we can work domestically on our infrastructure and globally with emerging economies to help them develop and advance their economies with low and lower carbon energy resources, I think then we can start looking at perhaps some firmer dates. But I think right now, just shooting for a date, I think it's I think it's a little bit over ambitious. So we need a strategy first. And right now, I don't think we really have a global strategy for that.
President Cabrera, let me ask you same question about the 2030 and 2050 dates. And let me ask you just to respond to what Dr. Gattie said.
Targets do serve to concentrate efforts, and I think I think that the key is to have ambitious and yet achievable targets. But targets do focus people's attention. You have a whole bunch of companies that are now announcing their own net zero commitments, and they're making those public announcements before even knowing exactly how they're going to make it. But those things do matter. And I think those global shared commitments, I mean, we saw it sort of in the first global development framework, the Millennium Development Goals. It was a very ambitious agenda, and we got a decent scorecard. So even if it's not perfect, so I do think even with all the uncertainty that surrounds it, that those targets are important.
Let me just kind of the final question today is centered around partnerships, and I think about the Candida building and as an example of Candida funding that essentially provided a design that design caused construction companies, subcontractors to do things differently than they would have done them. And so in a way, Georgia Tech building that building with a Candida-driven design has really been, I'm going to say, revolutionary in the construction business. And if every new building was built to that standard, and as we retrofit buildings, if they were built, to just part of that standard, we would lower our energy usage without doing anything else because of how tight that building is. So the partnership from Candida, I think about Cox Enterprises and what Cox Conserves are doing to drive sustainability, not only in Atlanta, but in all of their markets where they operate. I think about other partnerships like NCR, the building just across from Georgia Tech, that is a double platinum LEED building, the only one east of the Mississippi. I think about Facebook coming in here to Georgia and wanting more solar than any company has ever wanted. I think about Home Depot and how they are using their purchase orders to cause their vendors to change the way that they're doing business. Let me ask both of you as we wrap up our discussion today. I'm going to start with Dr. Gattie, go to President Cabrera. How important are these partnerships in moving us forward?
I don't think we could overemphasize how critical it is for us to be partnering with industry. President Cabrera's point about being in Houston and working with the oil and gas sectors and talking with those are individuals that essentially have the innovation base in our country. They have the big players. They have a history of working on massively large problems, complex problems, bringing to bear human innovation and ingenuity. They see these issues both at a local level, at a national level, but also at a very complex global scale. I don't think we can overemphasize how important it is to keep them at the table, engaged, and for us to be learning from them and understanding just how they have broadened their own aperture to see these issues. They're going to be critical. That's why I would like to have seen the oil and gas companies at Glasgow sitting at that table talking about how to address big problems. These are huge problems. It's critical, Commissioner.
President Cabrera, to you on the importance of these partnerships and making these achievements.
No, they're absolutely essential, and you're absolutely. I mean, in the case of the Candida building, which is a great example, it all starts with a nonprofit organization founded by Diana Blank, who came to us with a challenge. It's not just, hey, here's a gift to build your next academic building. It was money with a purpose. And so you have the nonprofit that provided the funding. You have the institution like Georgia Tech who accepted the challenge. You have the architectural firm, the structural engineering firm, the construction company, other organizations that play different parts. All of us working together for what was considered a really difficult challenge, difficult objective. Not only we achieved the objective, what's more important that each of those partners around the Candida building walked out of the process thinking differently about their own business. The construction company, the architecture, they now know what is possible. And so not only all those players were necessary to solve that puzzle, but I think that experience really changed the way we all think about our impact. So that's just one example, but I fully agree with Dr. Gattie and that partnerships are going to be absolutely essential.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being on today. I want to thank United Consulting for always hosting our event. They'll be giving some Cheesecake Factory gift cards away to a few of the participants today. They're doing a random drawing. So you'll get an email, all of you who signed up today, all of you watching on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. Thank you. We've seen that the replay of our streams really gets a lot of traction. So it's been fantastic having these two men with us today. And I wish you both a Merry Christmas and thank you for the good work that you're doing at your respective institutions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate you having me. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Thank you both, and Merry Christmas to both of you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, President.